Justine's going to whip out a banjo or something like that. So,
I'm going to do a little dance routine. I've got a little dance routine coming up.
So welcome, everybody. If you've been here before, you know that at Source we try to mix the technical elements of security with the business side of it, and we structure our program that way. And we usually have a really, really well-known technical, deep technical speaker. We also have somebody from the business side, a CISO usually, or an executive. And we thought this year, with kind of the things that are going on in the industry and the move towards risk tolerance and moving apps to the cloud and some of the things that are going on, we thought that Justine would be a great choice to address you all and talk about some of those changing trends. So Justine is the head of cyber risk at Dow Jones. So she's responsible for security, for identity management, risk management, and probably one of the most technical security executives that you will meet. So please give her a hand as she enlightens us this morning.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I came in on the train that I almost missed, actually, last night from New York. And I was starving when I got here because I almost missed my train. And I didn't look up Yelp. I went for a walk and found a local restaurant and sat down. And I'll share with you now that I'm a wannabe vegetarian. And there's a couple of vegetarian options on the menu, and I don't know what's good and what's not. And this is probably where I start to fail as a vegetarian, because I kind of know what I'm getting with a steak, and I don't know what I'm getting with a veggie burger. So I take a photo of the menu and I share it over Path with my nanny in Miami, who's a great vegetarian. And she's able to somehow decipher the ingredients in the way that it's described and tell me whether this is worth having or not. And she says, yeah, go for it, looks good, and I have it, and it's good. And this scenario last night, me sharing and asking my nanny in Miami whether I should eat the vegetarian burger or not, represents our participation in society today as we know it, which is known as the participation age. We were in the information age, where we started receiving information digitally over the computer network systems that we all use to this day. In the participation age, we're generating data and we're sharing data over more advanced sharing platforms like Path. So we've moved from this information age into the participation age, and society around us embraces this, but several elements of industry do not. One of those elements of industry, the IT risk industry that we all are a part of, has not moved into the participation age properly. We've actually failed to communicate well outside of our industry with society at large. And we see examples of that all the time. Target, for example. Look at what's going on with those poor guys at Trustwave and Target. We're about to see all sorts of brouhaha for the next months, if not years, as the fallout to what's happened with Target, because society doesn't understand what we do, and they have these unrealistic expectations of what security assessment means and what PCI compliance really gives us. And this is an example of our failure. It's our failure to really participate outside of our industry. I don't know why we haven't evolved properly to participate in the participation age, and I wonder if it's something to do with our ability or our inability to change and to evolve our professional roles. Those of you who consider yourselves to be information security professionals, probably most of the people in this room, I would argue you're not. I would argue you're professionals within risk management. If you consider yourself to be a hacker, I argue that you're a modern day private sector intelligence officer. And if you do this gig often, and some of you tend to make a bit of a career out of it, giving presentations maybe once a month or so, I might argue that you're not actually a subject matter expert anymore. You're in fact a performance artist. And I know that's going to make some of my friends in industry feel pretty uncomfortable. So some people are not comfortable with their roles changing as we move into the participation age. I'm sure you're all, no keynote would be complete without me mentioning a few buzzwords. One of them is the Internet of Things. You're all familiar with that. Pervasive computing, IT everywhere. In the participation age, IT is everywhere, and with IT comes IT risk. I'm sure none of you disagree with that. The The problem is IT risk is not everywhere. When you sit next to someone who you don't know outside of this industry on the train or on the plane, as I do all the time, and you talk about how the average consumer uses technology, very few of them think about the risk that comes with that. And that's again a failure of our industry to communicate outside of our bubble. We're stuck inside of our industry. We collaborate really well inside our industry in venues such as this, but we don't collaborate outside of it. We're certainly not in a position to really influence change in the participation age. We just don't get out much. We don't have many friends outside of our industry. So apart from gaining in popularity and gaining a few friends, what would really happen if we were to reach outside of our industry? Let's think about privacy and data. What if we really started to understand what data belonged to us and how to control that? What if I could control my data? I think about identity a lot ever since I started managing the identity team. And I think about what the world might be like if I truly controlled my digital identity, because right now I tell you we don't. Who here takes advantage of social sign-on services offered by Google and Facebook and whatnot to authenticate to other third-party services? And that brings us to single sign-on and federated identity management, which worries me. As much as I embrace federated identity management at work because it solves a lot of my problems, it worries me that I'm handing over control of my digital identity to the large corporate giants. If we, as an industry, were really to be involved in the participation age, we would be able to help ourselves control our digital identities, and we're not doing that right now. Policy. There's so much conversation about sharing and sharing between private and public sectors. Not only should we in this room be sitting at the table when these conversations are underway, but we should be influencing the outcome. And then there's the lexicon. I talk about IT risk. I'm not a fan of information security anymore for a couple of reasons. I think it's dated and I don't think it really means anything. I think IT risk much more clearly communicates what I do and what most of us tend to do. And the word cyber. I don't know if many of you have been involved in the sort of discussion that's been underway for a few weeks now about the use of the word cyber to describe what we do. And I would like to take a quick survey on who's a fan and who's not a fan of the word cyber. Don't like the word cyber. That's amazing. You guys are wrong. Cyber is great. Cyber allows us to communicate outside of our industry. When I'm sitting with my CEO and I say some blah blah, information security, IT risk, information security, by the time I get to the T, the guy's drooling on his desk or he's left. When I say cyber, everybody sits up and they feel like they can understand what I'm talking about. Another great example. Half an hour ago I was out the front talking to one of the parking attendants in the front of the building. He's like, hey, what's going on? What do you do? Oh, I work in information security, and his eyes kind of glaze over and he starts asking me about security cameras. And I said cyber. He's like, oh, yeah, like cyber warfare, like antivirus, like Snowden. And I'm like, yeah, like that. People understand cyber. It's a communication opportunity for us to reach outside of our industry. I'm going to borrow another phrase from my friend Sheryl Sandberg. She's not really my friend, but in the participation age I'm working on that, leaning in. What if we were to borrow that concept and really lean in to the participation age as an industry? What would that bring us? What has the participation age given us? It's given a voice to the little guy. It's given a platform, and sometimes that platform comes along with funding to the little guy. And it's brought transparency and changed the way that the big guy works. Large organizations, government organizations. Look at Mozilla. What happened last week with Mozilla and the CEO's resignation as a result, in part, of his employees demanding it via Twitter, none of that would have happened before the participation age. So if we were to lean in, what if that little guy were able to remain anonymous? With our skill sets that we can bring to society, we can help him achieve that. The platforms upon which the little guy is speaking, well, we can help them build it right. You know, I don't trust Path. God knows where that photo that I sent last night has ended up. And then there's the platforms and what they can allow and bring to our industry. I'm pretty excited about crowdsourcing and crowdfunding as platforms which are a result that they've come out of this participation age. And I get excited about ideas around crowdsourcing vulnerability research. I think that's something that we should explore as an industry. I come from a vulnerability research background. I used to be a vulnerability researcher. I've managed teams of vulnerability researchers. I've studied the business of 0 days and vulnerability research. I come from a background in security offense. And for those of you, like my friend in the corner over here who I just met who's new to this industry, might not be aware that in this industry you sometimes have to make a choice between offense and defense, and we kind of pick a side and we stay there. And I picked the offense side because that's the fun and easier side, by the way. Offense is about obtaining access to data and exfiltrating data, and defense is about protecting that data and preventing unauthorized access to that data. Traditionally, neither side of this divide have really thought about the data itself and what the data is and what the data means and what the data can do. And that's what happens in the participation age. That's what people who have embraced the participation age think about. And I think at this point, finally, we might have an opportunity to bring together offense and defense to help solve similar problems. So we need to grow up as an industry. We need to mature. And I know that I've had to grow up myself in the last few months. I've had to revisit some things that I've been taking for granted for a long time. For example, with regards to identity, I have, by choice, multiple digital identities. It's the way I manage, rightly or wrongly, it's the way I manage my digital life. I have several Google accounts. I have several Amazon accounts. I've got about 4 Amazon accounts. I've got an account for my apartment in New York. I've got an account for my house in Miami. I've got an account for my Kindle. I've got an account for my family. And this is because it's the way I manage all those recommendation engines. Because when I'm researching identity for my Kindle, I don't want to be offered Thomas the Tank Engine options. And when I'm ordering a whiteboard for my home office, I don't want to be presented with the latest Huggies line of diapers. And so this is how I manage my life. But this is something I've been taking for granted. And I think in the future, in the participation age, this is going to go away. This capability for us to maintain multiple digital identities is going to go away unless we get out of our industry and start influencing the way that society is changing. And digital self-reinvention, by the way, is another one. My professional role has changed more than most throughout my career. And every time I've evolved my role professionally, I've consciously changed my digital identity. And I worry that this is a luxury that won't be available to our kids as they grow up. Max is going to have one digital identity, and that's going to be it, and it'll be verified, it'll be him, unless we get involved and we start influencing the way that things change. Let me talk about my work for a little bit. I work at Dow Jones. Dow Jones is a News Corporation subsidiary. We are in the Wall Street Journal, Factiva, Barron's, MarketWatch, a few other products. I work out of the News Corp headquarters on the 7th floor in 6th Avenue, Midtown Manhattan. A really interesting place to work at this moment in time of transformation in the media industry. We're in Manhattan, we're cramped for space, so desk real estate, we've got literally piles of newspapers competing for space with MacBooks and Google Glass. I've got Rupert Murdoch and his team a couple of floors above me. The 3 floors below me are journalists and reporters and editors for the Wall Street Journal. I work surrounded by the technology department, so the walls are covered in agile post-it notes. And I've got WSJ Live, which is our news station, being recorded and broadcast 3 times a day right next to my desk. So it's a really interesting place to work. The CEO brought me in as a part of a transformation effort in the technology department. We changed our culture a lot. We started embracing open source technologies and built a real sort of DIY, do-it-yourself approach to building out our new platforms. It has been a time of rapid innovation, and I'm not just saying that as a buzzword. It is a do-or-die situation in the media industry right now, and we must innovate quickly. So with this rapid change brings rapid introduction of new technologies, and with that comes risk and the rapid potential introduction of vulnerabilities or opportunities, depending on which side of the house you sit on. We've been insourcing IT, and with IT comes IT risk. So we're insourcing IT risk, and we all know how challenged we are to recruit in this industry. So it's been a challenging time, but with that challenge, of course, comes opportunity. As we've rebuilt our IT infrastructure, I've built a whole new risk program into that. We've embraced transparency tools, so I can see any technology project and the state that it's in, who's working on it, what the roadblocks are at any time. We have 6,000 employees worldwide, and at any point in time I can see any technology project and where we're at. We're empowering our developers to own their code all the way through to production and the performance beyond. So we've been building out the automation systems that allow that. And with my identity team, we've been revisiting authentication, we overhauled our privacy policy, we think about customer data, how we're storing it, all that kind of good stuff. So we were then, and we are now, moving very quickly. The technology group works with the product organisation at Dow Jones, and they've also been undergoing a transformation. They help set our product strategy, and our strategy has gone from deprioritising work, simultaneous work across multiple products, instead focusing on a single platform, a single product that we call DJX. And this was our CEO's strategy, was to focus on the single product, DJX. And if you ask me in this time of massive transformation what our risk tolerance or our risk appetite was like, I would say it was very healthy, and that's putting it in a politically correct kind of way. So this is what we did. This was the CEO's vision. This is how I built out my IT risk program. And then one day, about a month ago, myself, all my colleagues, my management, everybody, suddenly learned that the CEO was gone. He was out. We had overnight, brand new executive leadership team. And the first thing that team asked us to do was look at our product strategy. And we wanted to focus on more flexibility across multiple products. And I felt a shift in risk appetite. It was coming down, tolerance was coming down. And I panicked. I'd spent a year building this IT risk program for this totally different culture. Had it been a waste of time? Were we able to shift with this change in risk tolerance, the people that we'd brought in, the tools we'd been building out? And I learned a really important lesson at that time, and that is that whilst we embrace adaptive cultural strategies, continuous integration and deployment, continuous monitoring, we need to think about continuous adaptation when it comes to risk tolerance, because risk tolerance changes. Wouldn't it be great if I had a solution, a technology solution, where when the risk tolerance changes, and by the way, that's not just going to happen when an executive leadership changes. It could be public sentiment, for example, in reaction to a massive breach. People might not care about credit card data, in January. By July, it's all anyone can think about. The tolerance comes way down, and it'll cycle back around and again across various areas that we care about. It could be a breach, it could be a change in regulation, it could be a market shift. Many things can affect risk tolerance. Wouldn't it be great if I had a system by which I was, even in an automated fashion, be able to adjust to reflect the change in risk tolerance? Right now, we think of risk tolerance as a sort of static thing. Oh yeah, what's your management strategy around that? It changes. It was a really important lesson that I learned. Those of you familiar with DevOps will have noticed I dropped a couple of DevOps phrases in there: continuous integration, continuous deployment. I'm not going to talk about DevOps, but I am going to talk really quickly about a guy who came out of our DevOps team, whose name is Sahil. Sahil is a long-time IT professional, long-time Dow Jones employee, who knows where the bodies lie, knows how our back-end systems work, and has helped me tremendously as I was lucky enough to help found and then manage the DevOps team at Dow Jones. Sahil did something that we all need to really learn from. He actually got outside of his comfort zone, showed his weaknesses and his vulnerabilities, said, you know what, I've got some experience in this IT risk space, but I've got a lot to learn. I want to learn. I want to join your team. So he took, one step forward and then 2 steps back, started over to some extent in our security group, and is now one of my rock stars. And one of the reasons why he's a rock star is that he's able to reach outside of our industry and communicate outside of our industry. He's able to allow us to really participate in the participation age. And it's not easy for him. We're a quirky bunch. We've got to get used to embracing and working with the Sahils of the world, and he's got to get used to us. He actually accused me of being a radical. This guy reports to me. And I was like, whoa, what do you mean I'm a radical? I don't even know how to really take that. And so I ran it by a couple of people who know me well, and they said, yeah, you are kind of a radical. And I was like, well, you know what? I'll get used to that. Maybe I kind of like that. So we're not going to talk about whether I'm radical or not, but we are going to talk about the fact that if you look at my track history, I have evolved and I do embrace change. Throughout my career, I've transformed my public-facing identity professionally 5 times. Professionally, I've been a ballet dancer, a scientist, a paid hacker, a manager, an independent entrepreneur, and now a corporate exec. And every time I've gone through that transformation, it's been hard. It's a really difficult thing to do. Changing your role is not an easy thing to do because you have to show a certain amount of vulnerability and you have to admit, you know what, I don't know much about this space. I've got to bone up. I've got to learn about this space. It's a hard thing to do. It takes a lot of self-reflection and self-awareness, and I think one of the reasons why I've been able to achieve that is because I literally spent the first few years of my professional career in front of a mirror, reflecting upon myself. I was a ballet dancer, and ballet dancers spend all their time thinking about what they suck at. I actually developed, during my time as a ballet dancer, a penetration testing methodology. I just didn't know it at the time. It's this model of self-evaluation, of evaluation, of assessment that dancers are so good at. You're constantly looking at yourself, thinking, where are my vulnerabilities? What do I suck at? What are my weaknesses? You identify each and every one of them, you address them, you fix them, and then you communicate the results in the form of a performance, usually. And we do that in penetration testing. We're looking for all these weaknesses across a space, a network space, or an attack surface of some kind. We're identifying vulnerabilities, we're theoretically addressing them, and then we're communicating the results. Did the same thing every time I've had an evolution in my professional career. I've looked at myself and thought, where do I suck? What are my weaknesses? What can I improve so that I really rock in this role? And this is one of the differences that I've noticed between, for example, the ballet world and our industry, because what we do in our industry is we reward people for working on their strengths. We celebrate subject matter expertise, and of course we need this. We celebrate the exploit developers who come up with more and more hardcore techniques in vulnerability exploitation. We celebrate our crypto experts and the deeper that they get into the math. We don't celebrate people who work on their weaknesses, which tends to be communication skills in our industry. So this is one of the challenges I think that we're facing, because if we don't start focusing on our weaknesses, in particular our communication skills, we're not going to ever be able to reach outside of our industry, and we're not going to stay relevant in the participation age. After I transferred from embracing the artistic part of my brain to the more scientific part of my brain, I moved from a dancer to a scientist. And I was finishing up my computer science degree, and I was thinking about what I wanted to specialize in, and I discovered this world of security. Nothing else was as interesting to me. I think it in part runs in my blood because my dad was a cop and then he was a spy, and I spent my teenage years evading physical security systems in my house in order to sneak out of the house at night. So I kind of had hacking in my blood, and then I learned the skills and joined the team. But I was doing some research, and there's a book that I read called Secret Power, and it's written by a guy called Nicky Hager. He was, in the 90s, an activist and a privacy advocate in New Zealand. He's probably celebrated these days given the current climate. Anyway, he wrote this book called Secret Power about my then future employer, the GCSB, the Government Communications Security Bureau, bit of a mouthful, intentionally no doubt. So he wrote a book about intelligence agencies in the 90s. Secret Power, great name. And I've been thinking, you know, what we're doing in our industry is we've amassed this secret power. We're not good at sharing. We've developed these secret techniques, these secret capabilities, and we are, no doubt about it, incredibly powerful. We understand IT risk, of course. We understand how to start systems, stop them, control systems. We probably understand critical infrastructure better than anybody. But with this power comes problems. People in positions of power aren't known for their communication skills, and they're certainly not known for their willingness to evolve and change their role. Organizations who are powerful are not known for their willingness to change their role and communicate. Remember, it's the little guy that has the voice in the participation age. It's not the powerful organization. So if we want our industry to participate in the participation age, then we've got to learn to communicate beyond our industry. We've got to change the way that we behave. We've got to learn to listen and share. Listening's hard. We're not very good at it. Most of us suck at listening. My kids, I don't even know what's going to happen in the future to listening skills, but even if we learn to listen, we've got to start being conscious of whether you're actually hearing me. Are you capable of hearing what I'm saying? Is my audience really listening to me? And I've got to be conscious of that, and I've got to adjust my message accordingly. This sounds so basic, but so many of us are not capable of doing this. So my challenge to the presenters who might be in the room is to think about this whilst you're presenting during this conference. Think about your audience, look at your audience. Are they listening to you? Are they capable of really hearing what you're saying? And if we can start to tackle this in this kind of baby step kind of way, maybe we'll start to teach ourselves the communication skills and reward ourselves for extending those communication skills so that we can step out of our industry, start communicating with the world around us, start participating in the participation age. So I hope that I managed to communicate with a few of you today. Please enjoy the conference. I'm very excited to attend it myself. And thank you very much for listening.
Questions for Justine?
Uh-oh.
Don't be shy. I will run to you with the mic.
Awesome.
So I completely agree with you in terms of talking about communication being a big problem. I've had some conversations with people from Bug Crowd and so on recently about how vulnerability researchers themselves, it's kind of difficult to even communicate technical impact of things, to effectively communicate vulnerabilities. Sure, exploits are the ultimate communication, but so we have a communication problem. What can we do about it effectively? We can't just go and improve.
One thing that I'm doing as part of our risk program, we're pretty good at identifying our vulnerabilities, and we do that with internal resources and external resource help. What we're not good at doing is translating that into a business language. And we're embracing the skill sets of people like Sahil, and even softer skill sets within our team in order to be able to put real effort, real manpower effort on translation of those exposures and those vulnerabilities into business risk. And it's really, really helped in, building out a risk program. And that's why we're in risk management. We're not just in information security. We've got to make that a part of our program. When we take our spreadsheets of vulnerabilities, that's all good and well. But we've got to be able to get priority developer time on fixing those vulnerabilities. Because if I just come up to you with a bunch of code change requests, that's all my senior colleagues are going to see, is requests for changing the code on perhaps legacy systems that aren't even being supported anymore. So I've got to translate that into the business risks that we're subjecting ourselves to, and that's really helped us. But I absolutely agree, it's a difficult process, and those funding vulnerability research might not have the budget to take a vulnerability to that next step of writing up an exploit, and we all know that the exploit is what often seals the deal in terms of demonstrating the impact of a vulnerability. But if the budget's not there, we can't take it to that step. So that involves relationship building and a certain amount of trust. I invest my dollars wisely when I'm going to turn a vulnerability into an exploit, because I can't afford to do it every time. But I do it every now and then for the right audience, which I carefully select. and I make sure that I build that trust with my colleagues as well. So it is about communication, so much of it.
Other question? There we go. All the way back.
It seems to me we have a difference in perspective between how the business considers risk and how we consider risk. For the business, the risk is of missing the opportunity, missing out, and not being able to exploit the technology. And
Yes.
for us it is,
Couldn't
what
agree
the
more.
hell could go wrong?
Couldn't agree more.
So how do we bridge that gap?
Well, I was having a chat with someone earlier about governance and information security, and I think we have this problem, this trend, where we've got this kind of loggerhead situation. I report to the CIO, and the CIO/CTO is the same role at my organisation. His primary mission is to build and ship product. Mine is to allow us to understand the risks associated with all the decisions that we're making. So I couldn't agree more. It's a problem, and I think some people try to address this with their governance structure. So moving IT risk or information security outside of the technology organisation is one way that some organisations are able to achieve that. That might not always be the right idea. So then it comes down to communicating risks and making sure that all the risks are on the table, not just those that are considering business opportunity. There's also, the cost and lost business, as we well know, as a repercussion of making the wrong decisions about how we handle our exposures. So we've got to get all those risks at the same table, basically, and whatever governance structure is going to allow you as an organisation to do that, that's the right way forward, in my opinion.
Can I have a comment? Yeah, and one of my assignments, we as security consultants were pushed out into the business so that we understood the business and the business knew why we were there.
Right.
And so whenever they started considering something, one of the first things they did was talk to us.
Yeah,
As to what might go
it's a great place to be. It must be a fairly mature program wherever it is that you're working. A bank. Well, the financial sector have been lucky, I would argue. I know that compliance drives the standard down, but frankly, it's given the financial institutions a decent, thickened budget. Some of these programs at some of these large financial institutions are amazing these days. And I've visited with my peers in industry at these banks, and the programs that they've got off the ground, they're able to achieve so much with their budgets as well as just compliance. Those who know what they're doing are also building out real risk management programs alongside of that. So sometimes I get a little jealous, and then I think about their day job and I get over it.
I really like the analogy that you made to ballet, where you are sort of constantly trying to work on improving where one is weak, and maybe we need to do more of that in security. So in ballet, where you go to when you're trying to work on weaknesses is you're refining technique, and it's actually, there's a set of techniques that are sort of agreed to, and it's kind of a relief sometimes to actually work on honing your technique. What do you think the analogous version of that is in something like information security? Where is our base technique?
I think we don't have one yet. And I'm very reluctant to start talking about imposing standards and methodologies and processes and qualifications and certifications, and it's the slippery slope that we've been playing with for a while. But what we are missing is metrics, real metrics. We're missing the ability for me to make a quick decision about IT risk. I want us to be able to measure the risk associated with the technology more easily than hiring a high-end boutique pen test firm to come in for 4 weeks to look at one piece of technology. That doesn't scale. We need solutions where that work's been done once and that information is being shared. And there are some ideas in this space, but I think if we could start with metrics that allow us to understand and measure IT risk, just explaining this concept to people I've found to be a real challenge. The risk associated with that technology in this environment, managing this data. There's got to be a mathematical equation behind that. We've got to be able to do this rather than bring in, whatever pen test assessment firm to help me come up with a big long paper. Every single time I do that, the CISO upstairs does that, the CISO over at the bank around the corner, we all do the same expensive work over and over. It's great if you're in the consulting industry, but it's not going to scale in the participation age. It's not going to scale along with IT if IT risk has to use this process every time we want to understand IT risk. So that's, I think, where we could start, is metrics.
What is your working definition of risk? I'm sorry, it's an area that I kind of specialize in. And it's my impression that a great many people in the technology community don't really understand what business people mean when they talk about risk. Threats are not risks. Neither are vulnerabilities.
Right.
You know, risk is something different. So I'd like to get your insight, because you used one of the magic words, translator. And it strikes me that you're probably a very effective translator between the technocrats and the plutocrats. Okay?
I think that there might be an equation that helps us start to measure IT risk. I absolutely agree. Risk is not vulnerabilities and threats. It's a multi-pronged equation of some kind that some of us actually have worked on a little bit. I think we have a lot to learn about risk from the financial sector. I think we have a lot to learn about risk from the insurance industry. And this is just the beginning. And I do agree. And you know, so much of this depends on who you're talking to and their perception of risk. So much as I shy away from standards and qualifications and repeatable processes throughout our industry, I do think we need to think about some real lexicon. I talked about lexicon earlier, and the use of the word cyber and the use of the word IT risk and leaning in. I think we do need to work on this as an industry. We need to recognize this is one of our weaknesses. This is where we're falling down. And we need to put real resources onto it. And and that team needs to communicate to the rest of our industry why this work needs to be done and the benefits that will come about if we do that. It's not just about finding bugs anymore. It's like always the opposite.
One thing I was a little surprised at that you didn't, I think, address in the question of how the business world deals with security is the question of user and usability and user experience, and the fact that most people don't want to go the extra mile for some event that they see as being very distant and not particularly threatening to them immediately, and now to have to spend more time with tokens and logins and all kinds of security stuff.
Two-factor authentication. Well, it's a trade-off. I don't think I'm telling you anything new there. It's a trade-off, and it's a challenge for me to tackle every day. Every day I manage the identity team, and we think about the way that we authenticate people. You know, I tweeted about implementation of SSL as like moving a mountain recently, and it's based on my experience. From the outside, you know, this goes two ways, because we think, why can't we just fix these issues and implement two-factor authentication? It's worth it, guys, trust us, because the world's going to fall apart and you're going to lose your control of your identity if you don't. But there is another story, there is another side to this. Full implementation of SSL is hard. I'm going to try and get a little bit technical now. We have this tool called JIRA, it's a transparency tool that we've implemented SSL for. And it turned out the JVM was running up to something like 90 threads or something, and consuming all this memory, and the system wasn't working very well until we moved the SSL endpoint off of JIRA and onto somewhere else on the local host, and it sort of solved everything. So SSL, long story short, was having this huge performance impact on our ability to run this JIRA server. So there's always another side to the equation, and it is a real balance. And so this is why communicating the risks. All right, you know what? We've got to move the SSL endpoint, or we're going to have to fix a few things before we can roll out full SSL. Here's the risks associated with that. Here's the reality of somebody taking advantage of the situation, and it's reputational risk. You know, there's a lot of talk in the media these days about use of SSL, and I want to be first. I want to be first. I want to be the first news organisation to say that we've got full SSL deployed, but it doesn't happen overnight, unfortunately. So one of the risks is that we're going to lose that opportunity to be first, and that would help the business immensely. So this is what I try to communicate, and this is I do sit in the middle and try to enable these conversations.
We'll take one more. Anybody? Or maybe not? Okay, let's give Justine another round of applause. Just a couple pieces of administrivia. We have printed feedback forms throughout the conference, but we also have online feedback. It's at isgood.is.gd/sourcefeedback. It'll also be tweeted on the Source Boston account. So please, as you're going through the conference, fill out one or the other so we can get the speakers the feedback and help them out. Communication, right? The next sessions, the rest of the sessions for the day are upstairs on the 5th floor. All three track rooms are up there. So next session starts at 1.